T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Coach on Fire Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Greatness Movement podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, speaker, author, and founder of the Greatness Movement based here in Phoenix, where we guide you to be the greatest version of yourself. Well, tonight we're going to talk about depression. I'm kind of shocked I haven't talked about this before. When I went looking through of what kind of topics should I do this week, I realized, I've never specifically done a show on depression. So, pardon me, I thought it's time. So whether you're tuning in live on Facebook or YouTube, please subscribe. And especially Facebook, or if you have any friends, if you're a loyal YouTube watcher, make sure you share this with other people. Depression is really escalating in society. It's becoming a huge societal issue. It's kind of, a lot of people don't want to admit it. There's a lot of stigma around I don't like the term mental health. I like the term emotional health, because mental health doesn't really describe what's happening with depression or many of the topics that that I deal with, or most people deal with. Plus, it also gives the wrong impression of what's going on. Science tries to create this impression that everything happens in your brain. They want to disconnect from the body and the emotions. We've known for a long time that the body and the mind are connected, that emotions drive the brain. So that's why I'm not a big fan of the word mental health. I like emotional health, since emotional health really is what drives us. So with that in mind, talking about depression, and I want to start off by, saying, hang in there. Because if you struggle with depression, or if you're listening to this because someone close to you either is or has struggled with depression, you've been trained to believe that it's a mental condition, and that there's only one way to solve it. It's, usually genetic is what you're told. And that pills are the only way to, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. There's nothing you can do. So I'm going to be challenging some longstanding beliefs that you've learned since birth. For some of you, I guarantee that's not going to be comfortable. It never is when we hear new information, even when backed by science, even when the scientific community knows it. Anytime we hear new stuff, it threatens our sense of self, our belief systems about ourselves. So it can be very uncomfortable. I know that, because as I've learned about all these topics in my own journey to heal myself from things I've been through, it was uncomfortable to have to change some of my beliefs and have a new understanding about things and realize what I thought was the case wasn't. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about tonight might make you a bit uncomfortable, but the objective really tonight is to help you understand basically where you are with the information you have, where you are in your depression or your understanding of depression, and the possibility of where you could be or where you could go if you're willing to open yourself up and challenge some of those long-standing beliefs. Now, I don't expect you to drop your beliefs in this one show. This takes time. I know in my journey, a lot of many aspects I fought in the beginning. It takes time to accept new information, to accept new truth. So I don't expect you to get there in just this one podcast. But give yourself grace and just open yourself up to the possibility of, if you're struggling with depression and you're not finding solutions, the information I'm going to share tonight might be the reason why. And this could be your way out, even if you're not quite ready to accept it just yet. So hang in there as you learn this new information. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start with some clinical evidence, because whenever you challenge beliefs, especially as, like, a lot of times I get comments on some of my stuff, you're just a stupid life coach, middle-aged single guy, what do you know? You don't have any letters after your name. Okay, that's fair. I'm middle-aged, single. I don't have any letters after my name. Yeah, that's true. But luckily, we're in an age where the proliferation of gathering information is incredibly easy. And the ability to research and discover truth, whether it's science-based, politically based, whatever your interest happened to be, it's very easy to go become an expert in many different topics nowadays. And that's something I've done. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the Journal of Pediatrics. It's the most prestigious organization dealing with child development. And this is from an article in 2012. So maybe you don't believe my expertise. So that's why I gathered some information from, experts that are societally acceptable, okay? From the pillars of the scientific community to back what I'm going to say. So I'm going to read just a paragraph or two out of this report that they issued this way back in 2012. So the things I'm going to be talking to you about tonight are not new. They've been around for a while, okay? So this is in part what they wrote in their article. It says, the architecture of the brain is constructed, meaning the development, the construction of our brains, is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth and it continues into adulthood. That means during pregnancy, your brain is being developed, and the ultimate construction and the way it's built is influenced by what's going on during pregnancy, during birth, and throughout our adult life. It's constantly evolving and changing from conception all throughout our adult life, okay? And our brain establishes either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all of the health, learning, and behavior that follow. The interactions of genes and experience literally shape the science of the developing brain and is critically influenced by the mutual responsiveness of adult-child relationships, particularly in the early childhood years. Did you hear that? Not some, but all health and learning are affected by the interactions we have with our parents from the moment we're conceived throughout our life and all the relationships we have. So that's one of the mistakes with medicine, and especially with depression and the crisis we have around opioid addictions and everything, is we have a culture that believes the only answer to any medical problem is a pill. We've been taught and trained that when there is ample, overwhelming scientific evidence that pills are not the answer, that the whole goal of a pill is to treat the symptoms, not the cause, and that the cause is primarily the interaction we have with our caregivers, most often our parents. It is the experience we have while our mother is pregnant and throughout our developing years that determines the health and our ability to learn and grow and the development of our genes and every aspect of our life. To ignore that and just throw your hands up and go, oh, it's my genes, that's why you're struggling with depression. Depression is primarily caused by your environment. It is primarily caused by the way you were raised. And I'll get into more of that. Okay. So what we're really getting at with this study, or not study, this paper, which is based off numerous studies. They are the experts in child development and how the brain works and how resulting addictions and mental, emotional, as I like to call it, health problems arise, is primarily derived from childhood experiences. So what we're really getting at is the development of the brain, the genetics of a child are all determined by the connection with our parents, both during pregnancy and throughout life. Your depression is caused or triggered by your emotional environment and your relationship with your parents and their own ability, your parents' own ability to either not handle or handle themselves emotionally. This has been medically proven in countless studies, and yet it is still not taught in med school. They want, the basic medical field wants to make the brain this disconnected object that acts on its own, that is separate from emotion, when we know the brain is primarily an emotional instrument, and that's criminal. To not have that information is criminal. I am encouraged to see, as I've mentioned in several podcasts lately, Cigna Health, big healthcare provider. They're running a batch of commercials. I think it's Queen Latifah is, starring in them, where they're begging their, what do you call it? Not providers, but all the people that are signed up under their healthcare, that you must talk to your doctor about your emotional health. But let's face it, you go into a doctor, the last thing he wants to talk about is your emotions. It's because they're not trained in it. They're not even taught about it. I mean, in many cases, the word trauma isn't even talked about in many medical schools, or the impact of emotions. That there's becoming some change, but for centuries, there's just none. Here's another fact from the CDC. Okay, this is the Center for Disease Control. This is not my opinion. This is medical fact from studies that have been done, that are posted on their website. And they say, based on those studies, nearly 90% of persons with severe depressive symptoms reported difficulty with work, home, or social activities related to their symptoms. In other words, their environment, in 90% of the cases, their environment triggers the depressive episode. Okay? If you are struggling with depression and you are only looking for a chemical answer, you are robbing yourself of the opportunity of healing. I'm not telling you not to take medicine, especially in the severe cases. It's probably warranted, it's needed, it's mandatory. But for many, the use of medication is actually the exact opposite. It's not warranted for mild or more medium type of depressive episodes. You're taking something that isn't effective. Studies show that it doesn't matter which depressive medication you take, every single depressive medication out on the market today tests out, when they do blind testing for the approval of the drugs, they all test out within 3% of the exact same efficacy, meaning having the exact same effect as sugar pill. Think of that. Every single depressive medication out there basically is just like taking a sugar pill. You will get a placebo. You get the placebo effect. Just because you think you're taking a pill, your depression might get better. Whether they give you a sugar pill or actually give you Zoloft, Paxil, any number of medications. There's virtually no distinguishing difference between the two. If that doesn't tell you that you're chasing the wrong solution, I don't know what else will. Again, I'm not saying stay away from it. It may be warranted, it may be needed, and it's probably could be, for certain people, a great place to start. But if you are chasing pills to solve, or pot, even pot's another horrific one, CBD, all of that stuff, all of those options just medicate the symptoms. They don't deal with the cause. There's overwhelming evidence that what depression is caused by is trauma. Now, I'm not always talking trauma of severe abuse, but trauma can just be, do you ever wanted a hug from your mom or dad and they were too busy to do it? That's trauma. That right there. People don't realize that. Well, we've all experienced that in childhood. It's normal. All right, I'm going to get into more of that. Here's the other thing that's astonishing to me. Since we now have cultivated and created this pill culture that everyone is addicted to taking pills, the number one cause of death of people under 50 in the United States is now overdose. Can you believe that? Overdose is now the number one cause of death of people under 50 years old in the US. Basically, every 3 weeks, we go through a 9/11, all right? The equivalent of the 9/11 terrorist attack. Every 3 weeks, we go through that in the US. Yet no one's even talking about it. The politicians, healthcare providers, medicine, doctors, nobody. We're literally living a 9/11 once a month and nobody gives a damn. Think about that. We're all bent out of shape about gun violence. Gag me. Gun violence is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. But we don't want to lose our pills, right? Plus, medicine is run by the drug companies. So there's no benefit for medicine to take on this battle. And who runs politics? Drug companies. Who pays for all the campaigns? All right. Again, I'm not saying don't take pills. I'm just trying to bring reality into a situation and into the culture of what's really going on. All right. It's fascinating too. The more I talk about this, the less people watch the show. It's just saddening how we want to stick our head in the sand and run away from these truths and not deal with ourselves. It's heartbreaking. So let's look at why the environment, our childhood environment especially, is such a big determiner of depression. Well, think of it. Think of how society's changed. Here's something to recognize is genes don't change in just a couple of generations. Yet we have this massive so-called change in genes causing opioid addiction. Everyone's blaming everything on genes, depression, opioid addiction, all these different things. But that's not how genes operate. Genes change over centuries, not in just a couple of generations. Well, what's been the major change in the last really 50 years? Well, it's women going into the workforce, women getting equality. So think of this. Think of all the stressed out women out there navigating careers and home life and equality and all the demands placed on women. That stress is impacting the brain development in the child, in the womb. Those chemicals that the mom is secreting as she pursues really a new construct of the feminine role in society and all the pressure that's associated with that, she's producing high levels of cortisol from her own fear. That's getting injected directly into the child's brain. The mother and her own stress, whether it's internal or that brought on from the outside, her husband, just technology, all the different things we navigate. She is literally creating the genes and turning genes on and off with her own stressful lifestyle, and creating a brain with a propensity to be addicted, to be depressed, all these new conditions, autoimmune disease, the rise in cancer, all of these, the explosion of autoimmune disease, cancer, ALS, fibromyalgia, all of these are not gene defects. These are the result of emotions trapped in the body not being dealt with. That's why we can't find a solution to it, because it's emotion based, and our culture doesn't want to deal with emotions. So when those mothers are producing more cortisol in the placenta, study after study shows that the environment, and the subsequent relationships and our emotions are driving everything in our development and these diseases and these conditions. Yet we are still ignoring all of this scientific proof and refuse to make emotional education and getting help a priority. I mean, look at the changing environment. I don't care if you're a wife who works or single mother who works or doesn't work. Take kids out of it. Look at how stressful life is. Parenting with no training. I mean, let's throw that aspect in. If you are a parent, you've never taken a class on it. Maybe you took a couple, Lamaze classes on how to breathe, and might have read a book or two, but virtually no training. I would venture to guess over 97, 98% of the population has never even researched anything about how to be a parent before having a child. Well, when that child comes out screaming, let me know how you're going to be able to handle that with no education on what to do. Look at technology. Look at how absolutely insane the world is changing. And we have to keep up with all that and learn it. Well, learning takes time. Our brain takes us a long time to absorb information. Yet technology keeps exploding and trying to keep up with all of that. Look at advertising. Do me a favor. Go onto YouTube and try and find old TV shows, old commercials, especially old commercials. Watch how monotone they were. One frame, one thing happening at a time. Well, now, because we've created this society that is so detached emotionally, we've created ADHD. All of this is not brain, it's not gene, it's all emotion based. It's a lack of connection with parents, and so it's basically turning on the fight, flight, or freeze response. ADHD is a brain that learned to freeze or flight and leave the situation. That's what's caused it, because of the lack of connection, the inability to be authentic with our parents. That's all ADHD is. And so look at commercials. Everything is like this, pure chaos. Just watch a commercial and you feel jittery afterwards. Go back and watch the old ones. Watch how calm, and most people would say boring, because we are so stimulated by our environments. Now, try and navigate friendships, relationships, work, finances, eating right, exercising, politics, all the societal unrest around guns, the border, terrorism. Oh my God. Overwhelming. And so we don't make room in our lives to learn about emotional growth or development. Yet we can't navigate any of these things I just listed without it. But we have a culture that refuses to grant us permission. And yet our inclination is to run away from the possibility of learning about all this. So I want to talk first of all, because most people I talk to, about 80%, and I would say I need to look for a study on this, but I would say 80% would say, well, my experience in talking to people, 80% say they had a wonderful childhood, didn't experience trauma, everything was great. Minimum of 80%. Yet within 3 questions, literally I can gut their whole life history. all we've ever experienced is in life, in our childhood, was trauma. I don't care who you were raised by, nonstop trauma. But the defense mechanism is suppression, repression. That's a different show. So here's a simple question to ask yourself. If you're one of those who goes, "What? You're crazy, Kenny. My parents were awesome." Okay. I don't deny every parent is awesome. This isn't parent bashing. This is just reality. I want to ask you a simple question. As a child, if you ever felt angry, sad, or scared, and if those feelings popped up with your parents, like something they did, something they said, and you experienced either anger, sadness, or fear, in that moment when you had that feeling, were you ever able to talk to your parents about those feelings? No, not a single person, right? After they yelled at you, could you turn around and tell them how scared that made you? No, you hid. When you were sad because they weren't available, they didn't pick you up, they left you sitting outside at some event, and you tried to express your feelings, what'd they do? Shout you down. You were not allowed to express yourself. When they did something that was scary, could you talk to them about it? No. No, because no one taught them how to deal with it either. And they were raised by parents who wouldn't let them talk about it either. There isn't a single child on this planet or adult who's been able to sit and talk to their parents in the midst of that turmoil, that heated exchange, and express their feelings and have a dialogue about it. That's where the disconnection starts. Many other things. That's trauma. That we've all suffered that. It's the repeated moments of that create ADD, ADHD, depression, all of the addiction, everything. We lose ourselves. We lose connection with our parents. We lose our authenticity because in that moment we have to suppress who we are. That's where the ADD and ADHD, we learn to freeze or flight emotionally. It's called dissociation. You leave your body. You may create a new reality through suppressing. I mean, think of the word depression. What are you doing? You're depressing yourself. All right. And so in those moments in childhood, when you couldn't act in your full authenticity, your full self, you had to depress it. Well, I just see someone here popped up and said depression caught them by surprise in 50. It's just been laying there waiting. That tells me something, there was enough maturity in your life that you were able to now experience. Actually, you thought out enough from the trauma you went through in childhood to experience the depression. That's why most depression happens in midlife. Our brain deteriorates, the defense mechanisms that allowed us to survive the perfectly imperfect childhoods we all experience degrade. All of those feelings come pouring up. We have no idea what to do with them. They overwhelm us. We've never been taught anything about emotions. We've all been taught, go get pills. Oh, it must be genes, which makes us helpless. Think of that. Think of how the medical community furthers our dysfunction. They make they give you this condition that seems like it happened out of nowhere and you just got struck with dumb luck. It furthers your hopelessness and helplessness, which created the condition in the beginning in childhood. It furthers the depression. It furthers the anxiety. It furthers the stress. It furthers the addiction. It makes you powerless to do anything about it. Look at what I'm advocating. I'm actually giving you a chance to recover. I'm giving you an option. You can go become an expert. Deal with these repressed feelings, all these difficult experiences, and turn them around. Get them to work for you, not against you. That sounds a hell of a lot more encouraging than you've been given this life sentence of death And oh, poor me, I've got to take pills the rest of my life, pills that don't work. You might as well take a sugar pill. I'd rather throw my hat in a ring that gives me a shot. I've taken antidepressants. They didn't do a damn thing for me. Not a damn thing. And for most people, they don't. Especially if you're under 25. For most people under 25, it massively exacerbates suicide, difficult feelings, the depression. It's highly ineffective. The other thing that lets you know is they're trying to give you chemicals to make certain aspects of your brain turn on. Well, if it worked right away, if it really was a lack of chemicals, why does it take weeks for the medication to kick in? Because what they're really doing is creating new pathways in your brain. It takes time for those to form. All right? They're trying to create a new brain structure, really. Well, you're not dealing with the structure that created the problem. That's why every person who stops taking the medication won't see a change in symptoms. All right? It doesn't heal you. The second you stop taking it, it all comes flooding back. That's because it's an emotional issue. You have to deal with the emotions. Now, like I keep saying, you might need medicine in the beginning because the depression is so severe. But if you're not dealing with the emotional aspect and the trauma you've been through and the difficulties in life, you are not addressing the cause. So think about depression. It's to push down. The emotions that we experience are too painful. It's a coping mechanism meant to allow us not to feel pain. It is an adapted response to something that happened. Okay? It is our brain and body's way of trying to survive something because we don't have the skills, tools, or knowledge to withstand, whether it's a huge life event, death of somebody, divorce, anything like that, or the resurfacing of something like that. Okay. Now let's talk about genes for a second, because I know I'll get a lot of pushback about this is genetic. There's nothing I can do. It's my brain, and I'm just a victim, and I'm helpless and hopeless. Well, genes don't predispose us to something. Okay, wait a minute. Genes do predispose us to something, but they don't predetermine. Just because you have a gene for depression doesn't mean you'll get it. Just because you have a gene for HIV or cancer or heart disease or any number of conditions that have run through your family doesn't mean you'll get it. See, that's the point. It's not genetic. If it was genetic, it'd be hardwired in and you'd automatically get it. All genes, DNA and genes are the repeated firing of emotions. And so you have a family history of these emotions that haven't been dealt with. And so it predisposes itself into the DNA of the person. What triggers it, what makes it live, what turns it on is your environment. We know from countless studies that people can be born with the exact same genes, but not all of them will be stricken with the disease, whatever that predisposition was. Saying that everything is genetically based doesn't account for the environment's impact on the forming of our brain and the forming of our genes. As I said earlier, genes don't change in generations, and we've had this massive explosion of autoimmune diseases, depression, addiction, all of these things. That's environment, people. That's not genetic change. That's environment. That's a lack of emotional health. That's the crisis in our country, in our world. Yet everyone's going to pills. Well, as I said earlier, the number one cause of death under 50 years old is drug addiction, is overdose. We are experiencing in the United States the equivalency of a 9/11 every 3 weeks, yet nobody gives a damn. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody wants to deal with it. Well, I'm going to keep dealing with it. Okay. As I said earlier, remember your mother's stress during pregnancy, that can trigger and create the gene dysfunction. Also, the way genes work is when you're born, 50% of your gene is active, right? Whatever your genes are, they're turned on, okay? The other 50% get turned on by environment. What's your environment? Your parents. That's why genes predispose you to something, but they don't predetermine. In other words, just because you have that gene doesn't mean you'll get the condition. Your environment turns it on and off. Now, the most scientific proof of what I'm saying was the landmark study done in the early 2000s. See what I mean? This is not new information. It is criminal that the medical community still refuses to deal with emotional health and the impact of our early childhood environments when it comes to these health conditions, and that you aren't literally being forced to submit to deep insight into your childhood before you ever see a doctor, so they can actually treat the cause, not the symptom. If you aren't doing that, you should demand it of your doctor, and find a doctor who is familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, who is willing and has some sort of program that will allow you to fully detail out the traumatic moments of your childhood so that they can actually give you full, complete health care. If you don't have that, if you got what I call the 7-minute doctor, you walk in, they got prescription pad in hand, and you got 7 minutes for them to fill out the myriad of prescriptions they're going to give you. If that's your doctor, fire them. Move on. Get somebody who's going to sit and talk to you about your emotions. If you want to heal. See, a lot of people don't want to heal because then it makes us responsible. And it's really nice not to have responsibility. Trust me, I'm a massive addict. Addiction, is a result of trauma, but we hold on to the addictions because then we don't have to be responsible for our life. All right? That's a whole nother show. Okay. So this is from the landmark study. It was really an obesity. It started as an obesity study because the doctor who came up with it was working with people who are overweight, and put them on diet and exercise, they'd lose weight, but they could never keep it off. And he was getting so frustrating. Finally, they said, "But you don't understand. We eat because we're in so much pain." See, if anybody's overweight, diet and exercise is a waste of time. Go deal with your childhood trauma. That's why diet and exercise works for a short period. I'm not telling you don't watch your diet, don't exercise. They're great things for you. But if you have weight issues, that's trauma issues, flat out. The evidence is overwhelming. It's trauma, flat out. And thyroid, all of that. All of those get triggered by massive trauma. Massive trauma. So if you have weight issues, there's only one way out. You have to deal with the stuffed, repressed feelings that you're stuffing every time you put food in your mouth. That's all you're doing, is trying to push down the pain. Well, the only way out of that is to become an expert in the pain. Okay, so here were the 10 questions that were part of the ACE study. Okay, so why don't you follow along and make check marks if any of these happened to you in childhood. 1, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, that can be sarcasm, or humiliate you? Did they act in any way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Okay, that's question number 1. Did any of those things happen to you? All right, now remembering being put down, that's shame-based stuff. That's simple things like me going in to ask my dad for help for homework and him going, what now? We've all experienced that. So y'all got one. All right. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Any of you spanked? Any of you pushed? Any of you thrown around? Put a mark down. Did they grab you so hard there were marks? Did you feel injured at all after any type of contact with your parents or other adult in your household, not just your parents? Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? In other words, did you get touched in any type of way that was inappropriate by anyone 5 years older than you? Put another mark. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? We've all had that experience. Being left home alone, eating dinner alone. That's a check mark for everybody. That's everyone goes through that. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you need it? Did you experience any type of that abandonment and lack of care? Question 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Well, that's at least 50% of you, at least once. Another check mark. Was your mother or stepmother, and this I find fascinating, women are more abusive than men, but they don't include men in this part. And if you want to argue me about it, I did a show several weeks or months back on how women are now more abusive than men are. So go back and watch that podcast. I lined it up, same thing, studies and everything to prove. But it's fascinating. Back, 16 years ago when they did this, they didn't even consider that women could be abusive. Shocking to me. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at them? Or sometimes, often or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? Okay. In other words, was there any type of physical abuse? I know my kids saw it because my first wife was abusive. Okay. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? Any type of pills or drugs? Do you have anyone in your house that's on, popping pain pills for anything? Do they smoke pot? Yes. Pot's a drug. Do you have someone who drinks, has a cup, and even if you have 2 drinks a night, that's a problem drinking. We have a huge misunderstanding of what alcoholism is in this country. Virtually everyone's an alcoholic. We just think it's only bad if you're in the gutter. That's not true. So was there a problem drinking? There was in my house. I think most people with the proliferation of booze and pot now, almost everyone would click that one as a yes. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill? Or did a household member attempt suicide? Again, with the proliferation of drugs and depression and mental emotional issues in the home, I bet you everyone has a check mark there. Did a household member go to prison? Okay. If you've had at least one ACE, this was back in the early 2000s, 88% of you have 2 or more. 88% of you. The bottom line is everybody's been through one of these. These are so general. They don't even get into the specifics and trauma by dysfunction. I mean, these are severe cases of trauma. This isn't just little stuff like I talked about earlier, which is trauma-based, which creates all of these conditions. Yet 67% of the population, this was over 70, it was the largest study ever done. And it's been repeated over and over and over with the exact same results. 67% of the population has suffered one or more of those. Of those one or more, 88% suffered two or more. Your chances for depression, autoimmune diseases, everything skyrocket. Alcoholism, all of it. You want to know what's causing your health problems? It's childhood. It's the pain and trauma we've all suffered that we as a society refuse to talk about and deal with and give people permission to go get help for. That's it, nothing else. Nothing. I'm being dramatic now. Now I'm being absurd. There's always a very small case where it's something besides what we've been through. But the statistics and the research is documented and overwhelming that if you are sick and hurt or have any sort of disease, it is nothing but your childhood and the untapped pain and trauma you've been through. This is what's heartbreaking. More facts for you. The CDC has shown that the most effective treatment for depression, especially for severe depression, now this is just severe depression, the most effective treatment for severe depression is a combination of medication and therapy. Yet, only 35% of the people with severe depression ever went to see a therapist. They're not. I've just shown you that the primary cause of depression, of all of this stuff, is childhood trauma, yet very rarely does anybody go see a therapist and an expert to help them. Even more heartbreaking, only 13% of people with mild symptoms have seen a mental health profession, and only just under 5% with no depressive symptoms ever see a mental health professional. Less than 5% of the population. You want to know why our society's in trouble? That's why. Right there. Less than 5% of the population is dealing with themselves emotionally. That's the downfall of society, is our lack of emotional maturity and lack of emotional skills. Now, this isn't a blame game. How can you be good at something you're absolutely unaware of how it operates in you? Same with your parents. Now, if you're a parent now, I don't blame you. I mean, look, even when I was learning about this stuff, I was still a terrible parent. But I did get better as I learned more. But if you're a parent right now and you're not literally calling up somebody tomorrow to get help and learn about how to be a parent and deal with your own stress and your own childhood stuff, then you are not to blame from today, anything before today, because this is all new information to you. So you're not responsible. But from this moment forward, if you choose not to go become an expert in this stuff, then yes, you can be blamed, because for the first time in your life, you had a choice. You had information that you knew could make your life better and your child's life better, and you chose not to do it. So from this moment forward, if you want to blame yourself, I'll let you. From this moment previous, no, I won't blame you. Not at all. Not one bit. and you shouldn't blame, and don't you let anybody blame you. There may be consequences you're going through. You have kids with ADD, all these different issues, drug issues, stealing issues, whatever they may be. Okay, those are consequences, but I'm not going to blame you. But if you choose in this moment to not go get help, then okay. Then you are choosing to accept blame from this point forward. And that may be the best thing for you. I'm not going to judge you. Sometimes choosing to hurt ourselves and those around us is what actually gets us to eventually do something about it. So that's why I don't judge people if they choose not to do the work. I just want you to recognize and get into reality and own the choice you're making. Okay? And the other thing is I want you to be okay with it and pat yourself on the back. For the first time, you know what you're doing and you're taking accountability for it. Well, you should feel good about that. Look, I'm not going to deal with it and I'm okay with it. All right. That, at least being okay with choosing not to be a better parent, live a better life, that in itself will encourage you and help you along the way. That's why I'm advocating you own it. I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm trying to get you. It's the opposite. I'm creating a paradox where you actually accept, no, for the first time in my life, I'm claiming something for me. I want to stay dysfunctional. I'm perfectly okay with the trauma I induce on my kids. I'm owning it. That's self-esteem. You're owning a belief system that you're okay with. That's a good start, a very good start. So how do we heal from depression? First of all, you have to love it. Just like I'm trying to get you to do right now. Love the fact that you aren't getting help, that you're one of the 95% who refuses to live in the greatest version of yourself. Love that about yourself. You've used that avoidance and that suppression and repression and depression and denial to survive life up to this point. It's kept you alive. Now you're recognizing that it's killing you and killing those around you, but it saved your life to this point. And if you're choosing not to do with it, it's going to continue to save your life, to be in that denial. Well, don't you dare destroy it. It allowed you to get this far. And loving it, loving your depression, loving your dysfunction, and the choice you're making to stay dysfunctional will eventually lead you in a better direction. So please don't beat yourself up for choosing to stay sick and hurt, and pass that on to the people closest to you. Okay? Trauma recovery is ultimately about reconnecting with your body and your emotions. See, they had to be pushed down, they had to be depressed in those moments with our parents. I could give you countless examples, but like I said, if you couldn't express yourself in those moments of fear, anger, and sadness with your parents, especially if it was an interchange with them and you couldn't express it with them, you in that moment, you severed from your brain and body, severed from your authentic self. Trauma recovery, depression recovery is all about reconnecting with that authentic self and being able to feel those emotions that were separated from you in those traumatic events. And again, trauma isn't just big events, it's development. Trauma is developmental. Just not feeling close to your parents, not having time with them, simple things like that, that's traumatic. That's developmental trauma versus abuse, which is an event. Okay. All right. The inability to connect with your parents in those moments of pain and being able to talk to them, that's developmental trauma. That's primarily what we all go through nonstop. Even today, you probably still can't talk to your parents and get them to listen to you. It's still affecting you on a daily basis. There are many great techniques to help you get in touch with that. One is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization retraining. That's wonderful for traumatic events. The show's getting close. I don't have time to go into it, but look for an EMDR specialist. EFT, that's tapping. I do that with my clients. every single one of them is blown away at how much it relieves the traumatic moment and makes it just a memory, not something they're reliving. Like immediately the change in them is dramatic in their whole persona and how much better they feel. Yoga is incredibly good body work. Meditation, massage, breath work. All of these allow you to get back in touch with your body, which is what's disconnected. That's why you can't feel. That's why you're depressed. That's why you have an overwhelm. You have a chemical imbalance. Because of this continued firing of feelings, your brain and body is addicted to a chemical imbalance. It's repeating it over and over. You have to break that cycle. You have to get in there and start creating a new chemical balance. All right. The single most important way to overcome depression and any life condition, I'm a firm believer, you may disagree, but you need to work with somebody, whether it's someone like me, a counselor, I don't care who it is, but an expert in helping you overcome these traumatic events. You can't do this work alone. Reading books and trying to figure it out on yourself, it's not possible. You're too close to the situation, and so the defense mechanisms that you used to create these false adaptations to survive what you went through, they will also interject themselves and keep you from seeing those parts of yourselves you need to deal with and recover. That's why you need a trained expert to help you discover those defense mechanisms and how you hide from yourself and how you're using those against yourself. I don't mean to paint a dark picture. I mean to paint a realistic, authentic picture so that we get a society that starts dealing with causes, not symptoms. It's criminal, absolutely criminal. And the only way for society to change is somebody to change it and start screaming about it. All right. And so for those of you watching, be a voice, share this show, start posting things about it, start sharing your own life experience, give people permission to share their pain and trauma, to go get help, to overcome their adverse childhood experiences, and not just play the victim and look for pills to solve an emotional problem. Let's start talking about how everybody's killing themselves with pills and overdose. And we as a society don't want to talk about it or deal with it. Let's break that societal model of ignoring, getting help, and becoming an expert in the pain we all struggle with and suffer with. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop it there. Remember what I say with judgment. Whenever we judge, blame, or criticize, the only reason we do that in somebody is because it's the old adage, remember when you're pointing a finger at somebody else, three are pointing back at you. The reason is we can only see those things we hate in other people because they're operating in us. It's how denial and projection work. They are a window into the parts of ourselves that we need to address, forgive ourselves, and overcome. I don't think there's a single person that's going to run across this show that doesn't judge, blame, and criticize. If that's you, get help. Start recovering. Start forgiving yourself. Heal yourself, because that's your finger pointing is you screaming at yourself to get help. The other side of that is, as I always say, whenever you see greatness in others, same reason. You can only see greatness in somebody else because you have it operating in you. Yet, more often than not, when I point that out to somebody, you watch them just physically move back, arms crossed. They just can't accept that. They don't love themselves enough. They don't see their greatness. That's predominant in society, is no one has taught us how to walk in and live in our greatness. If you'd like that, if you want to live in your greatness, the greatness movement is for you. We have another in-person group coming up June 20th here in Phoenix. We have online groups. just send me an email to kenny@thegreatnessmovement.com. That's kenny@thegreatnessmovement.com. Once again, kenny@thegreatnessmovement.com. If you're ready to stop living in pain and start living in your greatness and the greatest version of yourself, get in touch. If I can't help you, I'll do my best to put you in touch with experts who can help you. Have a great night, everybody. See you next week.
I can do anything. I can reach any goal today. I can do what I want. I can be what I want to be.